Serious, police, security guards, paramedics etc. Have you ever been called out only to realize it was a seemingly paranormal incident? What happened? I got called to persistent fire alarms being set off in a block of flats that used to be a poorhouse in the 1800s. The alarms would go off 3-4 times a night at certain times of the year. We arrive and residents are all outside saying they could hear a woman crying. No one wanted to go in as they assumed it was her that was setting the alarms off and she might be crazy. We went up. Yup, sure enough, could hear a woman crying. Sounded like the stairwell. Up we went and walked. Crying get louder. Turned the landing and realized the sound was then below us. It was coming from the top step of the previous flight of stairs. Well, I nearly shat myself. What made it worse was guess who has just bought a flat on the ground floor and was moving in the following week. Yup, me. I used to bail through the front doors, past the staircase and into my flat like I was being chased by wolves. Graveyard shift security at a hotel casino. We got called to the top floor of the hotel because people from the floor below were calling in noise complaints. I was the FNG, so I had a trainer with me when we went up. Dispatch told us over the radio that there was nobody registered on that floor. So cool, just a few idiots being idiots. We got up there and every single door on the entire floor was wide open. Anyone who has been to these hotels knows that you can't just accidentally leave the doors open because they close by themselves. They weren't propped open or anything, just open. We asked dispatch if engineering was doing any work up here or had anything going on during the day. After a few minutes they told us they called engineering and they said no. We just noped out at that point and said there was nobody up there. Thank you very much, Spade, for my new recurring nightmare. 2 second-hand stories from my friend who used to be a security guard in the federal building in Portland. One night she saw what looked like someone in a dark hoodie standing by an office door at the far end of a long hallway. When she called out, the person turned to face her, but she couldn't see a face in the hood. Then it zoomed at her, covering the full length of the corridor in about a second. Sort of swooshed past her and disappeared. She was standing at the end of the hall with a non-openable window behind her. A different time she got called into work because a co-worker, a huge hulking dude she had once seen, break up a fight by lifting 2 guys and smashing them together. Saw something that scared him so bad he left the building without even locking up. Drove home and called in from his bed. He refused to talk about it. Among their employees, this building had a reputation for weird noises and sightings. That first story, yeah, frick that. I would be on the first plane to the Mars. My sister has been a nurse for about 8 years in Southern and now Northern California. Worked in hospitals, med-surg, tele, ICU, dialysis centers, and now a hospice nurse. She has a few stories from the hospital. Things like children laughing, shadows, patients claiming they saw another dead patient when they had never met. One of the creepiest that she and the other nurses told me was about a patient complaining and scared that something was under their bed. He was older and confused, so they didn't think much of it. Checked on him, responded to the multiple calls, and just tried to make him feel better. The next day, a new patient went into that room, another older person but not confused, and called to complain about something under his bed. They sort of brushed it off again after checking. The next night, a new patient in his 20s and completely coherent called crying that something kept running under his bed. They checked and found nothing, but the patient was in such distress and shaking. They moved him. Happened quite a few other times as well. They never found anything, but that was so creepy to me. Not sure if this is paranormal or not, but we live together now and she works as a hospice nurse. Every so often, she would scream or I'd hear her struggle or make weird noises in the middle of the night. I'd go to check and she'd tell me it was sleep paralysis and explain what happened. That she saw a specific patient in her episode standing over her and growling, crying, or screaming. Always a very scary dream. The next day, that patient would die. Happened about 13 times so far. Trips me out. Okay, this is terrifying. I am a police officer in large city. There are housing projects in my sector that house low income residents and also some suffering from mental health issues. There's an elderly Haitian woman who calls late at night and swears she can hear ghosts and voodoo spirits in her residence. The first time I showed up with my partner, I told her I would go in and speak with the ghosts and closed the bedroom for about 5 minutes. then opened it and she hesitantly entered with me. I told her I asked them to leave and they need her permission to come back. She celebrated and said she can no longer see them and thanked us. This woman is otherwise quite articulate and intelligent and always refuses medical help. She will call 911 periodically every 3-4 months for similar reasons, and I'll go in with a water bottle with no label and go in and have her point the location where she saw them, and I sprinkle some holy water in the area and she thanks us and offers us food. We always politely decline and exit the residence. This is community policing and should be done much more. You're helping this woman without making things worse. A guy I worked with told me about a computer programming job he had at a small bank that I think was in Salem, Oregon. He was engrossed working on some code and didn't notice people leaving for the day, but at some point he realized he was alone. But he could hear slow, irregular typing, like somebody who didn't know how to type was using one finger. He was in a groove and kept working, but eventually he had to stop and figure out what it was. After walking around and finding nobody there, he realized the sound was coming from behind a door he had never seen opened. As he opened the door, the typing sound stopped, and what he found was a small closet with some boxes of forms and stuff stacked up, and on top of the boxes was an old manual typewriter, like from the 1920s. No paper in it. At that point he just closed the door and called it a night. This guy was a rather unimaginative person and also a hardcore biblical Christian. He never even reported this or asked his co-workers about it. I would have stuck a sheet of paper in the typewriter and then noped out for the night. Once worked in a call center very late at night. Around 8 PM you'd hear all the doors in the main corridor slamming shut, but the doors didn't open or close at all. Later we tried to frighten one of the workers by telling them the place was haunted, and found out about a month later that the entire building was on top of a medieval plague pit, where they just built over it and left the corpses buried. LOL, you might not believe me, but at Universal Studios Hollywood a lot we use golf carts or Ford Explorers to patrol. There is a golf cart that drives itself at night. We have the number of the cart on camera and I crap you not, it's been no operational for over 6 years. Someone wrecked it on lot. Thing drives around Jaw Lake and residential area at night. Scary crap is I patrol up there a lot for my swing shift, never seen it but cameras catch it zooming past you when we are driving LOL. This is honestly way too specific to the point it sounds genuine. That's so funny. Former paramedic of 15 years here. I never experienced anything paranormal per se, but I will say when you walk into a room where someone has recently been murdered or committed suicide by violent methods, there is a feeling in the room hard to describe. It's like the air is heavy, thick with malice. You can feel that something is not right. It's probably just my brain subconsciously telling me to get out of there, evolutionarily speaking, but it's the only thing I've ever felt out of the ordinary. I think it's entirely possible we leave something behind when we die. I mean, your personality and consciousness are just a series of electrical signals, right? That's a real thing. Spirit of death. It happened in the hospital as well. Before my actual job in law, worked security in a college back in 2016. I remember at some point a movement detection alarm tripped in the theater. I check up on the cameras and only the lobby had a camera. The lights were flickering, but it seemed intelligent, meaning one light was flickering then suddenly another one was. I decided to go check it out. All doors were locked magnetically. Lights stopped flickering the second I walked into the room. Creepy stuff. Marines stationed in Japan back in 2010 to 2012. I was military police. One night around 2-3 AM we hear over the radio, any units seeing the light over the water south. It was a Marine air station based on the southern tip of Japan. We had no flights coming in or going out that night. Everyone knew there shouldn't be a light flying over the waters. So about 3 patrol cars met up at the airfield where there was a way better view. Sure as crap there's a light sitting out over the water blinking slowly off and on. Some guys tried to say it was a star, so we had traffic control cameras from dispatch zoom in on it. Turns out it was slowly moving out of the cameras. So while we couldn't tell it was moving, the cameras picked it up. We sat there kind of amazed for an hour before it went away. As we were getting back into the squad car, I took a last look at the night sky and saw a small light dart behind some clouds in a movement that didn't make sense. I didn't tell the other guys, Just thought there's no way they would believe me. Months later I was running on the seawall and stopped to lay down and catch my breath. Again saw light, watched it drive into some clouds and then disappear. That was around the time of the tsunami in Fukushima. Super weird. Temporarily security guard at a supermarket in Holland. Suddenly I get a call that there is a kid locked in one of our walk-in coolers that you need a magnetic key for to unlock. Customers and staff have heard this kid yell for help. I get my magnetic master key and open the door. Execute this bitch empty. Eggs there is nothing in the cooler, no kid, no produce, nada. We explain it away as some joke but staff insist they heard it. Jokingly tell them they heard a ghost or some crap. And after that I continue my shift slightly unnerved. Ugh, I hope it's just a random thing freaking with them, and not the ghost of a kid who died in there. Not a nice way to go. I was a medic in the army and I was ordered to babysit a couple of soldiers in their barracks room because of poltergeist activity they were experiencing. The two soldiers apparently hadn't slept in a while and complained of objects being thrown at them. The command sent me because they had no clue where to go on the issue and figured they could have a rotating guard until they figured something out. A few days later they just moved the guys to a different room. EMT here. One of my partners told me a story about an old fire station that used to be in use. He and his partner at the time were sleeping in the bunks and it's pitch black for them. This fire station kinda looked like the one in Ghostbusters, so I'd say that the building dated back to the 60s. Anyways, there's no one else in the station except for them. Their mini fridge in the room cracked and someone screamed "Bishop, I'm not in the mood," and then the fridge slowly closed. Another one of my partners said that they had a situation that it was at a similar time around the top. All of the firefighters were sound asleep. Sometimes in our bays, garage main doors to station, we keep the back doors to our ambulances closed. At that time my partner stated that they heard a loud thump, went to go inspect what happened, and they found the back doors open to the truck and their equipment, jump bag, on the floor. I was a caregiver in a retirement home for 6 months at the beginning of the pandemic. We had one patient, let's call them Robert, that was mute, so when they called us because they needed something, of course we would just hang up and go to their rooms. I had been on vacation for a week and my co-workers and I didn't had the chance to go over what had happened while I was away. We had 24 patients for 2 caregivers, so we would split the unit in half. 12 residents for each caregiver and we would help the other if needed. So, the first shift after my vacation, I was taking care of Robert's unit. Few minutes after I arrived, I got a call from Robert's room. So, I hang up, finish with my current patient and calmly walk to the room. When I arrived, the door was locked, which was really unusual since Robert usually leaves the door open. I knock, unlock the door and open it. To my surprise, the room was pitch black except the television that was turned on. It took me a few minutes to realize that Roberts wasn't in the room. So, I called my co-worker and asked, "Have you seen Roberts?" and that's when they told me, "Oh, yeah, he passed away 2 days ago." Alright, weird but not the first time that our system glitches like that and we get a phone call, an empty room. I go on with my shift, like nothing happened. I had left the door open when I was helping another patient walk to the kitchen. When we passed Robert's room, they said, "Hi Robert, I thought you were at the hospital. Welcome back." I was 100% convinced that the room was haunted now. We would get a call from that room a few times a week until Roberts was buried, and after that, nothing else happened in that room. We've also had another patient calling us because there was Mike sitting in his chair every night. Mike was the name of the patient that passed away in that room. They had never met. Whoa, reading this gave me chills. I work security at night in a luxury condo. I actually started a little over a month ago and I already had a fair share of incidents. Alarms triggered for no apparent reason, finding unusual doors unlocked, random orbs on the cameras, door slamming while nobody's around, elevator phone started ringing by itself. My sheriff aunt said that calls come in all the time from houses that burned down, or where the occupants died a long time ago. This is the one that finally gave me chills. I have worked as a nurse for 7 years and have worked night shifts in 2 very old and prestigious hospitals a lot. Places that have gone through most London major medical incidents in the past 200 years. One of them opened in 1100 AD. Not once have I experienced anything you would consider paranormal activity. I feel like it is worth mentioning. These are places where death has happened a lot, like more than most places, so kinda prime ghost territory. This is my experience, but very willing to hear opposing views. I have heard it theorized that sensitivity to such things can be likened to what wavelengths an antenna can pick up. Some folks have a very wide range and pick up a lot of static, others a more narrow, focused range, and for good reason. It would be awful to pick up interference from every spirit who may be hanging out in the hospital, if you are trying to get on with your job there. I was in the army, but this story seems right for here. We were on a night patrol close to this weird place up in the hills. Didn't make us feel good inside, but couldn't tell why. During this patrol, one of our squads started reporting movement. When we all got to their position, they all looked like sheets. The CO of the squad was holding one end of the radio with it being connected, and to this day everyone in that squad swears that they heard a girl's voice through that radio. About 3 miles down the hill was a village that we'd visited before, and we had children watch us move to that position before, but we couldn't find anyone during that night that wasn't one of us. My dad used to work at a military fortress. He wasn't serving or anything, but his company such that it was based there, and as such they had custodial duties to the base. One occasion I remember him going on about was around New Year one year, and he was working quite late, so it was dark when he left. TBH, I think it was only around 7 PM, but the sun sets at like 3:30 PM in that part of the world in winter. On the drive home he realized he'd forgotten his phone, so he turned around to go and get it. He parked up and walked through the glacis, over the drawbridge and through the arch, which brought him into the main square from where his office was visible on the top floor of the block on the right. He noticed then that the light was still on in one of the end rooms of the office. I recall it was some kind of storeroom. It was odd, he thought, because he'd been the last one out and had locked up, so his first thought was that he'd locked someone in. When he got up there though, the lights were all off and nobody was about. He received his phone in quick order and left in a little more than a hurry. There were other happenings too which didn't involve my dad. On one occasion his boss came in one morning to complaints from the night cleaner accusing him of peeking at him from behind doors and hiding, giggling and flicking lights on and off, which was obviously a surprise because he'd been at home all night. The army occupied other floors in the block, and other blocks on the camp, and often complained about loud parties from the office which never happened, plus soldiers regularly seeing apparitions among countless other spooky things. Yeah, that third paragraph made me turn my light on. My co-worker used to be a security guard for the forensic mental health unit nearby. It used to be a mental asylum and was renowned for treating its patients horribly. There's a graveyard nearby with over 200 unmarked graves for bodies they exhumed on the old asylum grounds. A lot of people would try to sneak into the old abandoned buildings, and my co-worker and his partner would get deployed to tell them to pee off or to check it out to make sure no one was there, and he said very regularly he would feel spirits, see unexplained movement and hear screaming, especially in the treatment and intake rooms. I'm not very spiritual, but I totally believe him. That place has a lot of sad history behind it. I was working night shifts as a security guard from 11 PM to 6 AM in a 2-story office building that had probably 50-80 workers all in cubicles during the day. It was only myself there during the night. I was stationed at the front door where their switchboard desk is, and I'd do a patrol of the entire building every 2-3 hours. I always heard weird thuds and people walking. I even checked to see if I was right. Usually I'd hear something around 3:15 AM. I ended up getting used to it since nothing was ever there. The weirdest thing that happened was on my third patrol roughly around 3:30 AM. As I walked on the second story, I noticed some of the ceiling tiles were gone and 2 of the roof hatches were completely opened. I didn't notice any of this on my earlier patrols. When I told morning staff, they had no idea why. Later I talked to the other guard who used to work there for years, older gentleman and religious. He's also noticed many weird things, but he didn't want to talk about it. Other things have happened, such as computer screens coming on, coffee machines turning on randomly, radios randomly turning on. Couple times I'd sworn things were moved because it looked different from earlier patrols. It was an easy gig, but I'm sure the place was haunted by something. TLDR. Worked overnight security in an office building. It was haunted. See, if I were planning to break into somewhere that had a guard, I'd first spend a week or two making some kind of disturbance at the same time each night, so that they'd learn to ignore it. My ex-husband was military police. He once got a call that someone's neighbor stole their wallet. He went over to the lady's house and she claimed he was astrally projecting when he did it and he touched her, not in person. Astral projection. I believe in paranormal stuff, but this was just crazy. This is exactly how I would use my power of astral projection. One of our fire stations was haunted. I left the department and they rebuilt the station, so I say was. It wasn't my normal station, but I got sent there for a month. I'm sensitive and, well, walking into that building, it just feels wrong. My full-blooded Native American friend is the only other one that felt it too. It took me 3 weeks to realize that when I was in the kitchen I would never turn my back on the door to the bay, opposite the stove. One day I went there at night and as we were all sitting in the living room area set up in the bay, we all heard a distinct two-tone whistle but none of us did it. Another day we were sitting in the office area. There's a big metal door between there and the bay. The three of us stopped talking at the same time, just as we heard a few steps from the bay and the door opened about an inch. No one else was in the station either time. I've always wanted someone to tell me they have had a similar experience to what I had, but no one ever has. I was in training for the British Army in Purbright when I was 17. The rooms were split into the sections with 4 beds each. I was in the bed as you walk in through the door into the middle section to front and left. These rooms have them firelights like in hotels, that's like a single green LED that semi-light the room in the night. One night I woke up as I was lay on my side facing the door and there was this person stood by the door. Man shaped, no facial features or clothes, just kinda eyes, and was the same color glow as when you see someone through the black and white night vision lens. There's nothing else behind the door, just whitewash walls, and I know I wasn't asleep cause the morning after you can tell if it was a dream or not, and I was thinking pretty logical. I just stared at it under the duvet waiting till it turned into a coat or something, but it never did. Must have only been 10 seconds but felt like forever. Then I started to get a bit creeped put and closed my eyes. I remember telling the boys in the morning, please tell me someone else has had a similar story because I don't even believe in ghosts. There's a story somewhere on Reddit about a volunteer working in NOLA after Katrina. Apparently him and another volunteer were in a bad part of town that was flooded after the storm and were checking houses for survivors' bodies. They came across a small shack and found a dead black woman that tied herself to a pillar in the house. She was wearing a crazy grin and the bloating from the water made her all the more gruesome. They both heard a loud cackling that seemed to come from where she was. I remember details about the house being full of voodoo objects too. I'm gonna try to find the story and I'll post it here. Part of my overnight security job post college was checking in on this old penthouse that had been converted to an open office. I learned pretty early on to just wait until 1/2 in the morning since alarms would trip on the balcony around 12:30 most nights. The door would be open unlatched even if I had been there locked and set the remaining alarms previously. Just to the east of USDA Dairy Farm Building 173 in Beltsville, MD is an old building that used to house children. At night you can hear some of them playing in the attic above you. I have no idea how you would get permission to investigate it, but you would have a field day if you obtained it. I was a corrections officer for 8.5 years at a county jail. We had an inmate commit suicide in his lockdown cell and not be found for a few hours. That unit has primarily been an ADSEG unit the entirety of the facility being open. In the years I worked there, we had 3 inmate deaths in that same cell. 2 suicides, 1 natural causes. I can't say for certain there is something there, but doing midnight head count in that unit was always a little unnerving. You get used to being watched by inmates, but that unit, it always felt like it was something else. Even when the unit was empty you would get that feeling that something was there. New officers experienced it, veteran officers experienced it, even the maintenance guys when they went into work on a cell. My husband has a story when he was working at a jail. He and another guy were in, let's say, the security room, where they have cameras on the cells and watch the inmates. It was dead of night and they had a crazy guy by himself in one of the pods, which is a cell where lots of inmates stay. This guy was crazy enough that he got one to himself. He kept hitting the call button to talk to the guards, and every time my husband answered, the inmate would be crying and pleading for the guards to move him to a different cell. He said that something wouldn't leave him alone. Well, the guy is crazy and in there alone, so they tell him to go to sleep each time and hang up on him because they're tired of his crap. Well, right after the last time he makes the call on the two-way intercom and my husband hangs up, the inmate is holding his knees, rocking back and forth in a corner on the camera. Typical crazy guy stuff. Out of curiosity, my husband holds down the button to listen in. He hears the dude sobbing and another voice talking at the same time. Husband lets go of the button quickly and looks over at the other guard in the room with him and asks, "Did you hear that?" And the other guard is sheet white and says, "I didn't hear anything," and turns back around, refusing to say another thing about it. Shit, this is a nightmare. Did a couple of security shifts in a particular hotel as emergency replacement when their regular company had no one on hand. The regular staff of the place told me the basement was haunted and that weird stuff happened there. I also had people from my company I met on completely unrelated assignments tell me as much when I mentioned I worked some shifts in that hotel. I gotta say though, I never found anything weird or eerie inside that basement except for the two janitors I found sleeping inside the technical corridors. I don't think it's haunted, but there is one particular room at the residential tower I currently work at that gives me the heebie-jeebies every time I go in there. Extremely oppressive atmosphere. It's a pitch black boiler room with 3 water pits where excess rainfall collected in the drains goes together. It's extremely noisy with all sorts of pipes and pumps making odd noises along with the drops of water. The brain being such a fantastic pattern recognition machine, I sometimes hear those noises as voices speaking in gibberish to me. It's pretty unnerving and I never want to leave the room with my back turned to it. Probably told you it's haunted so they could get sleep even when you're working on Mayo. If you are new to the channel, you can subscribe. I publish new videos every day. Until then, check another video. Bye for now.